Hello YouTube, this is Gizmo88, and this is a HD review. It's the second review of the Super Nintendo. And there's some things I didn't get to that I wanted to get to on this, but the one thing I want to mention about this yellowing, there's lots of things you can use. I've even heard, I didn't get to a lot of that, but I've even heard, you can use soap and water on them. I mean, even scrub them. Magic eraser, rubbing alcohol. Might even be able to use what do they call that? OxyClean by itself might even be a good, if you had like a bucket of water and you kind of soaked it in there, it would probably pull a lot of the yellow out. Soaking the case is probably not a bad idea. You could probably really get a lot of the yellow out by doing that, but I'd take no responsibility for anything you do to your system, so keep that in mind. But that would probably be something that would work. Now, one thing I want to mention is the Super Nintendo, unlike the Genesis and all the other systems, does not have a multi-tap. So, I mean, everything is 2 players only. There is no 4-player games. Now, one thing that I didn't talk about very much was the Super Nintendo CD or Super Famicom CD, which plugs into that port right there. It says EXT on it. That port is actually small compared to like the Genesis version, but the Sega CD and the Super NES CD were going to compete head to head, and it was Nintendo and Sony together basically. Now it wasn't going to work out though, because Sega went right downhill. I mean, it went good for when it first came out basically, and that was it. And that's why the games library for them is so small. Now the Super Nintendo, the North America version, there was no prototype for North American, so even if there was, or even if I could, if I could find a picture, I would have done it that way. I would add a picture of it into my review. Now there is a Super Famicom version and a European Super Nintendo, and I don't know how we can see it there, but that's pretty much what it looks like. Now there's a card that actually goes in the cart here, and that's what switches it over to the Super NES CD. Now the only problem is there's no region lockout, so depending on what card you have depends on what games you play. So even if you're in Japan and you have a U.S. card, you're going to play U.S. games. But if you're in Japan, you got the Japan or the Famicom, you're going to play the Famicom CD. So there's no region lockout. It just depends on what card you have. Now, whether or not it was going to have its own power supply like the Sega CD has is unknown. My guess, probably so, because judging by looking at the insides of the Super Nintendo, I would have to say that it probably does not supply enough power to run both. The AC adapter is only like 10 volts. That's all it uses. It's like a 9 or a 10 volt. Let me see. Yeah, it's like 10 volts, but it only outputs like 8 or 9. So I mean, it's something like that. I don't think 10 volts would be enough to run both though. But so more likely it was probably going to have that. Now, another thing I want to talk about is only mainly a Famicom deal, but there was an online service for the Super Nintendo and Famicom. Now, it was only for Japan, though, so unless you were in Japan, you really couldn't use it anyway. And there was only maybe 1 or 2 games that used it. But what it was a cartridge that said here it had a modem in it, and you plug a phone line into it, and then it would run out that way, and it would dial out. It wasn't a very successful feature. One, because obviously the internet wasn't developed back in '93, and cause that's basically when the biggest years for the Super Nintendo was 91 through 93. But back in those years, I mean, hey, I think we can all remember like when the Weather Channel first came on. It wasn't very graphical. You see web pages today, it's just unreal compared to what they had then. But nothing was as graphical. And the computers back then won't even hardly run the internet today because it's so graphical. It's more than they can handle. But this particular system, you know, it did have that online capability where it would basically transfer like different things from different systems. I think is what it did. I think they had one game where you could transfer, like, you could paint something and then send it to somebody else. Like they had a special Mario, like we had Mario Paint, but I think they had some kind of a paint game over there that used the online service. Now there is an action, or not an action replay, but a Game Shark, and there's also a a Game Genie for the Super. And they're both cheat systems. They both pretty well work the same way. It might be a little bit different in controls, but that's about it. Now, one thing I didn't talk about in the other review is the controller. Now, this is the official Super Nintendo controller, and it's fairly simple. I mean, it's just a D-pad, a select, start, and then you got Y, X, B, and A. You know, and the B and A are the darker, and then the Y and the X are lighter, and then you got the L and R buttons. Let me get that out of there. I apologize, these haven't been out in years. They've been actually sitting in storage, so they're a little bit dirty, but for the most part, you know, it's not hard to hold on to, and they call it the wishbone controller, and they actually had one for the NES too, and it only had just the A and B buttons, and then it had the start and select and D-pad. It didn't have no L or R on it either. I think they were just a little bit thinner too. But for the most part, you notice there it says Super NES controller. I don't know if you can see that or not, but and these controllers aren't real complex either. I mean, you know, if your wire goes bad or anything and you want to replace the wire, I mean, you can cut it down here at the end and cut it here and run a new wire out. Pretty simple. Now on the ends of these, you notice these are a little bit wider than the Sega Genesis, but they're not quite as long. That is a definite feature that I like about the Super Nintendo. I would much rather have these wider ends than the longer ends, because these might be a little bit harder to get out sometimes. But if you got your console in a cabinet, you don't have to give it as much room when your controller ends don't stick out like that. But anyway, and that's a non-working controller, so yeah, I'm not too worried about the cord or nothing. Now, you know, as I mentioned before, the Super NES and Super Falcom CD was canceled, so it wasn't released. It's not going to be released. For the most part, I think that's about it. I'm going to open this up and talk a little bit. Well, no, this concludes our review. Thank you.